France's President Emmanuel Macron says arms deliveries to Israel for use in Gaza should stop. His comments have been angrily rejected by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. So how significant is Macron's statement and why such a furious reaction from Israel? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the program. I'm Hashem Ahelbarra. France's President Emmanuel Macron has called for an end to arms supplies to Israel for use in Gaza, stressing that his own country isn't delivering such weaponry. His comments in an interview with a French radio channel brought a furious response from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who described them as a disgrace. Israeli attacks have killed nearly 42,000 Palestinians in Gaza since war began last October and injured almost 100,000 people. Thousands more are missing under rubble, believed dead. So how significant are Macron's comments and will they have wider impact? And why has there been such an angry response from Netanyahu? We'll be discussing all this with our guests shortly. But first, this report from Alexandra Baez.
A year into Israel's war, its bombs continue to pulverize Gaza. Tens of thousands of tons of the world's most destructive explosives have been used against Palestinians, leaving craters the size of buildings and vaporizing civilians. More than 41,000 people have been killed. Over two-thirds were women and children. And Israel gets much of this firepower from Western governments. The French president made headlines on Saturday when he called for a halt to deliveries of weapons being used in Gaza.
I think today the priority is that we return to a political solution, that we stop delivering arms for fighting in Gaza. France is not delivering any.
The Israeli prime minister was quick to criticize Macron's comments.
As Israel fights the forces of barbarism led by Iran, all civilized countries should be standing firmly by Israel's side. Yet President Macron and some other Western leaders are now calling for an arms embargo against Israel. Shame on them.
The French government clarified it will continue to supply the equipment it said is needed for what it called Israel's defense. That includes components for the Iron Dome air defense system. But Macron also criticized the hypocrisy of some nations calling for a ceasefire, while also supplying the weapons that are enabling the war to continue.
If we call for a ceasefire, what's consistent is to not provide weapons of war. And I think that those who supply them cannot call for a ceasefire every day and continue to supply them.
The UK suspended some arms sales to Israel in September, but the US is by far Israel's largest supplier, sending shipment after shipment of 2,000-pound bombs, Hellfire missiles, and other munitions. At least $6.5 billion worth of security assistance in the last year, a number that is continuing to grow. Germany is the next biggest arms provider. Both countries continue to pledge their unwavering support for Israel. And the flow of weapons of war, killing Palestinians in Gaza and now civilians in Lebanon, shows no sign of stopping. Alexandra Baez, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Let's bring in our guest in Paris. Benoit Muracciolem is the president of Action Sécurité Ethique Républicaines, a group promoting human rights in the field of peace and security. In London, Ziad Issa is the head of the humanitarian policy of the aid organisation Action Aid UK, thus calling for the UK to immediately halt all arms sales to Israel and hold it accountable for all potential breaches of international humanitarian law. And also in the French capital, Bertrand Heilbronn is the honorary president of the France-Palestine Solidarity Association, the largest Palestine Solidarity Association in France. Welcome to the program. Benoit, how significant is the statement of Macron urging an end to arms supplies to Israel?
Good afternoon. Yeah, first, it's a major pass. But first step. And we wait for this first step since a long time, not just before the war in Gaza, but because Israel, the state of apartheid in Israel, for instance. So at least I think that the French administration and the president understood now their responsibility through the arms transfers in this possible genocide in Gaza, but also crimes against humanity and war crimes in occupied territory.
Okay. Ziad, is it the same sentiment which has forced the British government to suspend on September 30th, on September 30 out of 350 licenses for arms to be exported to Israel?
I think there is more pressure and need for the international community and for all countries at this moment to suspend all type of weapons and arms transfer to Israel. The UK, after spending month conducting a legal assessment, has concluded that there is a very clear risk that UK weapons might have been used or is being used in violating international humanitarian law in Gaza. But sadly, the government has only suspended less than 10% of the total number of the arms exports provided to Israel and continue to provide the component of the F-35 jets that has been used in Gaza. And now we've seen reports of this jets also being used in attacks on civilian infrastructures in Lebanon. Over the last year, we've seen critical progress from the International Criminal Court, from the International Court for Justice on investigating potential war crimes and international humanitarian law violations committed by Israel. South Africa has brought a case against the Israeli government failure to prevent the act of genocide. And the ICJ has made a very clear risk of plausible genocide of Gaza and have outlined steps that countries should take in order to avoid complicity and not to be facilitating or contributing to violations of international humanitarian law and committing war crimes in Gaza and West Bank and the wider Middle East. And one of these fundamental very first steps countries should do is to stop supplying Israel with any type of weapons or having any type of military cooperation with them at this critical time for the Middle East.
Bertrand, the French President Emmanuel Macron not only spoke about the need to stop arms deliveries to Israel, but he also stressed for the need to find a political solution to Gaza. Is it a decision driven by moral obligations as far as France is concerned, or just you see it as pure politics? Macron wants to send a message and find a bigger influence in the region.
Well, thank you. I first would like to say that Macron's statements is still a bit ambiguous. He says delivering arms used for Gaza. How can he distinguish? Regarding the French policy of arms trade, France is in fact delivering mainly components to Israeli military companies. How can they see if these components are used or not on the battlefield? So there is no transparency really, but it is a step. It is a significant step, which can be the result of the civil society mobilization. Not later than yesterday, we were demonstrating in Paris and in many other cities in France, and we can see that in Macron's statement, he says he is quoting the French public opinion and other countries' public opinion. So it is important. I like the person who is speaking from UK. I think that ICJ had a significant effect, and in France, I think that the major turn was in May after the ruling of the ICJ on 24th of May on Rafah, which was absolutely not followed by Israel. And this was a problem which probably led to the ban of the military Israeli companies to the Eurosatory arms show, which was also the result of a major mobilization of the French civil society. After that, speaking of a political solution, it's something very, very fuzzy. It is just the ordinary speech. The only significant point is about arms delivery, arms embargo. However, he's stating one should not deliver arms. One could be the US, but what is the real influence of France on the US policy? We can have some doubts on it.
Okay. Benoit, your association is part of a large movement which is trying to track all sorts of French support for Israel, particularly when it comes to weapons, but at the same time trying to raise international awareness about the need to prevent the use of those weapons and to prevent genocide happening in different parts of the world. Could you give us a sense of the French contribution, of French assistance to the Israelis in terms of weapons?
First, I just want to correct something about the obligation of France, of the French government. The French government, the French president used the term of risk, clear risk. The obligation of France in the Arms Trade Treaty, which was ratified by France in 2014, is that it's not a clear risk. The obligation is Article 6, which says that the states shall not authorize any transfer if the transfer would violate its relevant international obligation. And what are the international relevant obligations of France? They are in face of the UN Charter, Article 55, 56, which engage the states to make the respect of human rights law. They are also in front of the Convention for Prevention and Punishment of Genocide. This is also their commitments in the international humanitarian law. So this is all this body which are engaged, the French government, not to say, oh, these weapons may have a risk or clear risk to be used. No, this is just because when we push this project of Arms Trade Treaty in 2000, it was to say, okay, it's not a punitive treaty, it's a preventive treaty. The states are the commitments to prevent human rights violation. And this is why today they have to stop all these transfers. So that's the first point. The second point is we introduce a case in we see the tribunal in France because they gave a license authorization to Eurolink for a license on ammunition, part and components of ammunition. And we said, okay, because of Article 6, the French government has to stop. And when you see all the weapons that the French government transferred to Israel, it's not a big amount of money. It depends on the year, but it can be between 15 million and 30 million. In 2022, the French government delivered for more than 300 million license to Israel in 2022. So that's not a big amount of money like the US and even Germany. But we know the field, because we made some research on the field, and we know that a small amount of money, for instance, the part and component of ammunition, is not a lot of money. But you can imagine that if it can be used on the field, for instance, is a massacre of when the people of Gaza wanted to get the food. But this is maybe this kind of ammunition was used against all the civilian. So That's the reason. That's the reason, because it's
All
not
right.
because of clear risk, but because of the obligation and the knowledge of the situation.
Ziad, you all started with the Netherlands, and then you have now Germany, you have Britain, you have the French saying that it's about time to look into the supplies of weapons to Israel. Is this part of a coordinated effort by the Europeans to send a political message and say, you know what, after almost a year now, it's about time to pursue something different and put an end to this war?
There's a lot of pressure from the international community to be stopping these atrocities and severe suffering that people of Gaza and West Bank and now people of Lebanon are going through on a daily basis since last year. I think as a humanitarian organization, as a human rights groups, a civil society organization, we saw on a daily basis the amount of suffering the people of Gaza are going through. As an Action Aid, we have been talking to our civil society partners in Palestine and listened to people's stories. We've seen stories from women who had miscarriages because they went for days and weeks without eating because there was severe limitation on the amount of food going to Gaza. We've seen reports from our colleagues in Al-Auda Hospital having to carry out medical operations on people without proper medications, proper medical equipment, and sometimes carrying out operation using the light from their torch on their phones. They have carried out C-sections on women without using anesthetic. All of these are examples of the huge amount of suffering and struggles the people of Gaza are going through on a daily basis. We've seen the level of force that's been used in West Bank, people being denied access to schools, access to their lands, their houses have been destroyed, they have been kicked out of their villages. All of this is happening and being supported and facilitated by arms and weapons that countries has provided to Israel. Regardless of how big the amount or how small is the amount of arm exports or arm license provided to Israel, the obligation of these countries at this moment of time is to suspend all this arm license or all arm supplies and all military collaboration with Israel.
Okay.
Very recently, the UN General Assembly has voted on a resolution to adopt the International Court of Justice advisory opinion that have clearly outlined that Israeli presence in the occupied Palestinian territories are unlawful, and they have outlined all the illegal practices and policies Israel is following in both the West Bank and Gaza. And in order for these countries to avoid their complicities in war crimes, in order for them to avoid facilitating war crimes, violation of international humanitarian law, they need to stop providing arms sales to Israel. So the call from President Macron is very clear that we can't risk to continue to be complicit in this war crimes that's taking place in Gaza, West Bank, and now expanding to the wider region.
Bertrand, a year of catastrophic events, death, destruction, displacement. The world order meant to step in and contain the crisis seems to have failed. Can I ask you a question about the momentum in France? Are more and more people joining your call for more solidarity, or do you think that it depends on where you stand politically? So if you are right, far right, therefore you might be standing more towards a case. If you are left, far left, you will definitely embrace more of a Palestinian cause. Is that the case in France?
In fact, when we see the coalitions which are in the streets, most of the people are from either unions or political parties or associations, which are the unions and political parties are more on the left side, especially the political parties. But when you see the opinion in France, I think that the opinion in France is really upset about what is going on in Gaza. For months and months, there has been nearly nothing in on the French news about what is going in Gaza. And really, I would like to tell all our solidarity to all the press, all the journalists who are fighting to give us information from Gaza, all those who have been killed, and especially also from your company. So we think that now they are obliged to show a little more of what is going on in Gaza, and that people are more and more upset about such a terrible. Well, it's a moral breakdown. In fact, it is completely mad that our countries could be the official policies should be so complicit with what is going on. So people are more and more angry about that. And I note that in the address by Macron yesterday, he quoted the French public opinion. That means that there is something moving, yes. They're much beyond the borders of the political opinion and political parties.
Benoit, the conflict has expanded beyond Gaza, Lebanon, and could further degenerate into one of the worst crises the region has ever seen in almost a century. And then Macron came and said there needs to be a change. Do you think that his main concern was the need to safeguard French particular political interest in Lebanon? And this explains why he's very furious.
I'm sorry, but with Macron, it's difficult to know. The person, what he shows since he's a president, that he shows more like an opportunist person, like a person who is able to understand and to anticipate the danger of the region. When we made the case, the first case in the French history on the French arms transfers to the coalition led by Saudi Arabia and the Emirates in Yemen, we face a war with the administration, with the French administration. For the first time, we are blacklisted in the ministers. So that what we understand, I agree completely about what Bertrand said, that there is a real strong conscience and revolt from the French society about what is going on. And the term of complicity are now very, very clear. I think that I will not be surprised if in the next years there was some complaint on the ICC with the name of the President Macron, the person in charge in front of the control of arms transfers.
Ziad, you're operating in Gaza and also in Lebanon. What would be your biggest concern if the situation remains the same, with no breakthrough, with no political settlement, with no ceasefire?
I mean, the humanitarian catastrophe has already reached unimaginable level, and it's just going to continue to grow and grow, pushing more people into more suffering, both in Gaza, in West Bank, and now in Lebanon, but also in the wider regions where more countries remain at risk of escalation. Over the last years, we've seen what's happening in Gaza. The report you showed at the beginning of this panel has outlined the number of people killed, the number of people injured. But beyond these numbers, there's also severe damage that's happened to civilian infrastructures that has caused indirect harm and suffering for civilians. The Israeli bombardment on Gaza has completely destroyed the water system, which has brought polio back into Gaza after it's been eliminated from the strip for over 20 or 25 years. They have completely destroyed agricultural land, bakeries, which has pushed people to be at an imminent risk of famine a few months ago, which we've seen the declaration from the IPC and many of the UN agencies about the risk of famine and famine taking its toll on people. Until this day, we still have almost 500,000 of people experience catastrophic level of food insecurity in Gaza. Hospital has been completely unable to cope with the number of people who are coming with severe injuries. Many hospitals are out of service. there's very few hospitals partially functioning across the Gaza Strip. We heard stories from our medical colleagues in Al-Auda Hospital where, people are going through, people coming to hospitals for regular treatments. They are unable to provide these treatments for them. That is causing these people medical conditions to deteriorate and to, sadly, there's people who are being unable to continue their kidney dialysis treatments.
Okay.
We all know what's going to happen to you if you couldn't finish your kidney dialysis treatment. People couldn't receive their chemotherapies. People coming with, needing simple medical procedures, not being able to be provided to them. And now we're seeing this risk expanding in Lebanon. Over the last few days, the number of casualties is just increasing, and people being killed and injured in Lebanon increasing day by day. There are a few hospitals in the south that's already unable to function. So to continue providing Israel with arms, it basically means to continue to cause this suffering and killing of innocent civilians, innocent women and children, and elderly across Palestine and Lebanon and the wider region.
Bertrand, European liberal democracies share many things in common: promoting freedom and protecting human rights globally. When it comes to this particular issue, they seem to have abandoned some of those ideals. What do you think was the main reason why they took a backstage position? Is it the fact that they understand there's absolutely nothing they can do to change realities on the ground?
I think we need to distinguish between the global European level, the European Union, and each of the countries. Regarding the European Union, it has always been very, very weak, as it is not united. We say payer, not player. At the present time, there is when you want to reach consensus at the level of the European Union, you have Hungary, you have Czech Republic, which are voting against anything. So it means that the European Union as itself has very, very weak effect on the European policy. However, we are pushing because it is in the power of the European Union. You are pushing now in a campaign for the suspension of the association agreement between Israel and the European Union, which is very, very important, and also pushing to ban Israel from the research programs, at least Israeli military companies, which are in fact working on dual uses. Regarding every country in Europe, I can tell you a little more if you like, just as you like.
Okay, unfortunately we'll have to leave it there because we're running out of time, but I promise you next time we'll have more conversation about this. Bertrand Heilbronn, Ziad Issa, Benoit Muracciolem, I really appreciate your insight. Thank you. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com, for further discussion. Go to our Facebook page, that's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Hashem Ahelbarra, and the entire team here in Doha. Bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.